The curtains in my bedroom were always drawn incompletely, a habit from when Beatrice was alive. She liked to wake up at first light. Now those rays wake only me, Ezra Holloway, a man 67 years old, with gray hair and wrinkles that, according to my daughter, make me look like a grumpy turtle. It's been 3 years since Beatrice's passing, pancreatic cancer. Fast and relentless, she was the center of our family, the glue that held everyone together. Without her, everything fell apart like a house of cards. Or maybe it didn't fall apart, but just showed the true face of what we called family. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the clock. 8:30. Nira and Reeves and the twins were due in 2 hours. A Sunday visit they called checking on Daddy, and I mentally dubbed inheritance inspection. I stood up, feeling the familiar ache in my right knee, and headed for the bathroom. My house in Champaign is not just a building. To me, it is the epitome of 40 years of hard work, thousands of inspected construction projects, and endless hours of overtime. It's 2 stories, with 5 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a terrace overlooking the manicured backyard. Beatrice put her soul into this house, choosing every interior detail. When I retired 7 years ago, we had planned to travel, but her illness had scrapped all plans. I went down to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and got out the oatmeal. Despite all the money I had, I kept my habits simple. Nira considers it stinginess. "Dad, why are you saving money? Do you have to take everything to the grave with you?" she often asks, not realizing that it's not about saving money, it's just that I don't need much. While the kettle was boiling, I looked out the window at my backyard. A well-manicured lawn, a few old oak trees, flower beds that had once been Beatrice's pride. I take care of them now, though Reeves keeps offering to professionally landscape. Of course, he's a landscaper, except I don't want him touching what Beatrice created. The doorbell rang at 10:30 sharp. Nira is always punctual when it comes to visiting me, but she's late when I ask her for help. "Daddy!" Nira came in first, as energetic and loud as ever. Her brown hair was done up in a fancy style, her face perfectly made up.
"You're wearing that old thing again?" I looked down at my plaid robe.
"Good morning, Nira. This is my house. I can wear what I want."
Sure, sure, sure. She waved and walked into the living room without even kissing me on the cheek.
Reeves came in next, tall, with a neat beard and a perpetually condescending smile. "Hello, Ezra." He always called me by my first name, never Dad or father-in-law. "How's our old man doing?" I ignored the question and turned my attention to the twins who had entered next. Pearl and Ansel, 16 years old, my only grandchildren. They are so similar in appearance. They both have dark hair and Beatrice's eyes, but so different in personality. "Grandfather!" Pearl hugged me. She was always more open, more emotional. "I brought you my new drawing, and I got an A on my physics test," Ansel added quietly, standing a little farther away. He was more reserved, withdrawn. "That's great!" I smiled at them both. "Come on into the kitchen. I made blueberry muffins." "Dad, you know we're watching our figure," Nira interjected, but the twins were already heading for the kitchen. "That's for the kids," I replied. "And there's coffee for you." While I made coffee, Reeves paced around the kitchen, looking at everything with the same appraising gaze I saw every time. "You know, Ezra, this kitchen is just begging for an update. Granite countertops went out of style a long time ago. Everyone's using quartz now. And these cabinets, they're too dark for this space." I poured the coffee in silence. Reeves continued without noticing my silence. "Nira and I were just talking the other day about how when—" He hesitated but quickly corrected himself. "If you ever want to move to a smaller place, we'd completely modernize this space. I've already sketched out a few ideas." I set the cups on the table and looked at him. "I can't imagine when I'll ever want to move out of a house I've spent 40 years building." "Dad," Nira intervened, entering the kitchen. "No one's talking about moving immediately. It's just that at your age, it's something to think about. This house is too big for one person. I'm 67, not 97, I replied. And I'm doing just fine on my own. Neera rolled her eyes, a gesture she'd learned from her mother, but it looked playful to Beatrice, but to Neera, it was just rude. Of course, Dad. Whatever you say. We moved into the living room. The twins settled on the couch with the muffins. Neera and Reeves sat in the chairs opposite. I took my usual seat, an old leather chair that remembered better days. How's school going? I asked my grandchildren. Good, Ansel replied. I signed up for an extra course in programming. And I'm in drama class, Pearl added. We're doing a production of Macbeth. Oh, for God's sake, Neera sighed. Who needs Shakespeare in the 21st century? I told you to take Spanish lessons. It's more useful for college. I noticed the enthusiasm in Pearl's eyes faded. Shakespeare will never go out of style, I countered. And if Pearl wants to do theater, that's fine. Dad, please don't interfere, Neera said sharply. Reeves and I know best what our children need. I remained silent, but I noticed Pearl's grateful look. The conversation turned to the usual topics. Neera's work at the travel agency, Reeves's new clients, plans for the summer. I mostly listened, inserting lines where necessary. After a while, Neera suggested the twins go to the garden. Children, go and get some air. We need to talk to grandfather about adult matters. When the grandchildren came out, Neera turned to me. Dad, we need to discuss your finances. I tensed up. The subject came up with alarming regularity. What was it? You're getting older, and I'm worried about how you're handling your finances. You still refuse to hire a financial advisor? I've managed my finances for 40 years, and I've never made a bad decision, I replied. Times have changed, Reeves interjected. The investment climate is different now. There's a risk that your savings could be devalued. I have a diversified portfolio. I was getting angry. Bonds, stocks, real estate. I wasn't born yesterday. Still, Neera continued, it would be wise to let a specialist look at your assets. Reeves has an acquaintance. Of course Reeves has a contact, I interrupted. Reeves always has someone who can help me spend my money. Reeves's face flushed slightly, but he kept his condescending smile.
Ezra, I'm just offering to help. After all, it's in the best interest of the whole family.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Neera straightened up in her chair. Dad, you have to think about the future, about our children, about what you're going to leave behind. I looked at both of them. They weren't even trying to hide their true motives. To them, I wasn't a father or a father-in-law, but a walking wallet with a limited lifespan. I'm thinking about the future, I replied calmly, and what I'll leave behind. Don't worry. Dad, don't be so stubborn. Neera was clearly getting impatient. We're taking care of you. I appreciate your concern. I got up from the chair, signaling that the conversation was over. But my finances are my business. Reeves and Neera exchanged glances, and I knew they wouldn't leave the subject alone. But for today, I was spared from continuing the conversation. After lunch, when Neera and Reeves went to the kitchen to do the dishes, a rare moment of their help, I sat on the terrace with the twins. Pearl was showing me her drawings, and Ansel was talking about the latest physics project. Grandpa, Ansel said quietly. Are you okay? You seem quiet today. I looked at my grandson. Sometimes I forgot how observant children could be. I'm fine, just a little tired. Mom and Dad were talking about your house again, weren't they? Pearl asked, not looking up from her drawing. I looked at her in surprise. What do you mean? They're always talking about how they're going to remodel this house when it's theirs, Ansel explained. Dad even made a model on the computer. I felt something inside me clench. It was one thing to suspect, but it was another to know for sure. What do you think about it? I asked, trying to sound casual. Pearl looked up at me. I like the house just the way it is. It smells of grandmother's perfume and your books. It's, a real home. Thank you, sweetheart. I smiled, feeling a sudden warmth. At least my grandchildren saw value in things that couldn't be measured in money. When they left, I stood in the hallway for a long time looking at the closed door. The house was quiet again, but this silence was filled with echoes of today's conversations. I walked slowly through the rooms, touching things Beatrice had picked out, remembering how we'd argued about the color of the walls and the shape of the chandelier. Every corner held a story of our lives. In the study, I sat at my desk and pulled out an old photograph of Beatrice, little Nira, and me against the backdrop of this house, newly purchased, not yet furnished. We were all smiling, full of hope and plans. They didn't even wait for me to die, I thought as I put the photo back in its place. Inside, the resentment that I was used to suppressing was slowly building up, but today it was especially strong, fueled by the words of my grandchildren and the cavalier behavior of Nira and Reeves. I remembered Beatrice's words shortly before she died. "Don't let them break you, Ezra. You're stronger than you look." I hadn't understood what she meant at the time. Now I was starting to. I wasn't planning on having a family dinner. The idea had occurred to Nira when she called me Wednesday night. "Dad, I thought we could have dinner at your place on Friday. Reeves got a new contract and we want to celebrate. Plus, it'll be good for you to socialize with people." She said the last phrase with that peculiar intonation that suggested I was turning into a hermit. But it wasn't about being a hermit. It was just that most of my friends had already died or moved to Florida, and making new ones at 67 just didn't seem to work out. I said yes, of course, partly because I really wanted to see my grandchildren, partly because saying no would mean a new wave of talk about me shutting myself off from my family and probably getting depressed. Nira liked to use psychological terms she snatched up from TV talk shows. So on Friday, I was standing in the kitchen making dinner for 5. Baked chicken with herbs, Beatrice's recipe, potatoes, fresh salad, nothing fancy but good and tasty. I wasn't a chef, but in the years since Beatrice's death, I'd learned to cook well enough not to starve, and even enjoy the process sometimes. When the doorbell rang, I wiped my hands on a kitchen towel and went to open it. Standing on the doorstep were Nira, Reeves, and the twins, all dressed a little more smartly than the family dinner required. Nira in a dark blue dress with pearl earrings, Reeves in a shirt and jacket, the twins in matching white shirts but different pants, Ansel in black, Pearl in dark green. "Hi, Daddy!" Nira pecked my cheek. She smelled like her new perfume, pungent and, for my taste, too sweet. "I hope we're not too late?" "No, everything's just about ready." I stepped aside to let them in. "Grandfather," Pearl hugged me. "You got a new shirt?" I smiled. My granddaughter always noticed details like that. "Yeah, I bought it last week. You have to update your closet once in a while." "Finally," Nira murmured, walking into the living room. "We were beginning to think you were going to wear the same clothes for the rest of your life." I ignored the comment and turned to Ansel, who was holding out a book to me. "Here, Grandpa, I thought you might be interested. It's about quantum physics, but it's written for regular people." "Thank you, Ansel." I took the book, genuinely touched. "I'll definitely read it." "Ezra," Reeves patted my shoulder. "What's that smell? I hope you haven't been experimenting with the kitchen." "Your last lasagna was, shall we say, peculiar." "It was my first lasagna, Reeves." I tried to remain calm. "Tonight we have roast chicken. Nothing fancy." "Ah, the old classic," he nodded with the same condescending expression I hated so much. "Well, so be it chicken." We moved into the dining room. I'd set out the plates and cutlery from the afternoon, laid the best tablecloth, the embroidered one Beatrice used for special occasions. It might have been excessive for a simple family dinner, but I wanted it to look dignified. "Oh, my mom's old tablecloth," Nira remarked, running her finger over the embroidered pattern. "It's so vintage." I stayed silent, though something inside me clenched. To Nira, everything Beatrice owned was old or vintage, pronounced with slight disdain, as if things that outlived her mother had no right to exist. I brought the food and we sat down at the table. Reeves immediately reached for the bottle of wine they'd brought with them. "Italian 2015, he announced, pouring it into glasses. Ezra, you'll appreciate it.
It's not the cheap stuff you usually buy.
I looked down at my glass. I'd never been much of a wine connoisseur, preferring simple and affordable, but Reeves's comment was clearly intended to emphasize my rusticity over his refined taste. So, Neera began as everyone filled their plates, we have great news.
Reeves has been awarded the landscaping contract for a new apartment complex in the north of the city. It's a very prestigious project.
Congratulations, I nodded to Reeves. It sounds impressive. This is just the beginning. Reeves cut off a piece of chicken. The developer has already hinted that if this project goes well, he has a few more properties in the works. I could expand the business considerably. You're going to need more employees, I pointed out.
Exactly,
He pointed his fork at me. And a bigger office, by the way. I was thinking about that. He looked around, he said. Your office on the first floor would be perfect for a home office. Big windows, separate entrance from the street. Clients could come in without disturbing the other tenants. I'm tense. There it was again, talking about my house as their property. My office suits me fine as an office, I replied dryly.
Dad, Reeves is just thinking out loud, Neera interjected.
No one is going to kick you out of your office. Bye, Reeves added and laughed as if he'd said something incredibly witty. I saw Ansel and Pearl exchange glances. They were clearly feeling the tension, though they tried not to show it. How's school going? I asked, deliberately changing the subject.
Good,
Ansel replied.
We started a new section of chemistry.
It's very interesting. And I have rehearsals every day, Pearl added. I'm playing one of the witches in Macbeth. It's a great role, I smiled. Ominous and memorable. If only she spent as much time studying as she does on these stupid rehearsals, Neera sighed. Pearl, have you forgotten that you're going to college next year?
With your math grades, you're not likely to get accepted somewhere decent.
I've noticed Pearl's slump. She got excellent grades in literature and history, I pointed out. Not everyone has to be a math major. Sure, Dad, Neera rolled her eyes, but with a degree in literature, she'll only be able to work at Starbucks. We want a better future for our children. I want to study drama, Pearl said quietly.
We've already talked about this, Neera cut her off.
First, a proper education that will give you a profession. Then you can pursue your hobbies. I saw Pearl's eyes fill with tears, but she continued eating silently. I felt the urge to stand up for her, to tell Neera that she was stifling her daughter's talent and passion, but I knew that would only make things worse.
Neera took any criticism of her upbringing as a personal insult.
After dinner, we moved to the living room. Reeves immediately began pacing around the room, examining furniture and accessories with the same appraising gaze I'd seen dozens of times. You know, Ezra, he began, stopping in front of a bookcase. This furniture is awfully old-fashioned. Nobody uses massive cabinets anymore.
It's all about minimalism, built-in storage.
I like my furniture, I replied. It's sturdy and functional.
Of course, that's probably important for your generation.
He smiled indulgently.
But when we live here, we're going to have to change a lot of things. These cabinets, the couch, the chairs, everything will have to be replaced.
I felt anger building up inside me.
When will you live here?
I repeated, trying to speak calmly.
Well, you don't think you're going to live here forever, do you? Neera intervened. Dad, be realistic. This house is too big for one person. Sooner or later, you're going to have to move to something more appropriate for your age and condition. And what does that mean? I looked at her. A nursing home, Reeves said bluntly. Or, if you want, we can find you a small apartment, as long as it's supervised.
I'm 67.
I was getting impatient. I'm in good health, with a clear mind and a clear memory. I'm not going to a nursing home. Not right now. Neera sat down beside me and put her hand on my shoulder with that fake sympathy I hated so much. But we have to plan for the future, and it would be wise to prepare in advance. Prepare? I looked at her. You mean give you the house while I'm still alive?
No one's talking about that, Dad.
Nira looked offended, though that's exactly what they meant. We're just discussing options. What if we discuss options where I stay in my house for the rest of my life? I asked. Reeves laughed. Ezra, be realistic. You won't be able to take care of a house that big when you're even older. The stairs, the cleaning, the garden. It all takes energy you just won't have.
I can hire an au pair,
I objected. On your pension? Reeves shook his head. I doubt it. I have savings. I was getting angry. Which you'll run out of if you spend it servicing this monster. Reeves looked around the room. Look, Nira and I have it all worked out. You give us the house. We modernize it and increase its value.
Part of the profits go to keep you in a good nursing home. Everybody wins.
I looked at my son-in-law with a growing sense of disgust. He was talking about my house, my life, as if it were a business project. What do you think? I turned to my grandchildren, who sat quietly in the corner, clearly feeling uncomfortable. Yeah, Pearl began, but Nira interrupted her. The children are not part of this discussion. This is an adult conversation.
But we're talking about the house where they spent a lot of time,
I countered. Their grandmother's house. Their opinion is important too. Dad, don't drag the kids into this. Nira looked annoyed. They are too young to understand such things. They're 16. I shook my head. When I was their age, I was already working and supporting myself. Times have changed, Nira said. Children develop more slowly now.
or they're not given the opportunity to develop,
I countered. Reeves laughed again, and that laugh, condescending and fake, was the last straw. You know, Reeves, I stood up, my hands trembling with anger. I think you're forgetting one important detail. This house is mine. I built it with my own hands, paid for it with my own money, and as long as I'm alive, I'm the one who decides its fate, not you.
The smile is gone from Reeves's face.
No one's disputing your ownership, Ezra. We're just thinking about the practicalities. No, you're thinking about getting my house. I couldn't hold back any longer. You come in here, you look around like you already own the place, talking about what you're gonna tear down, what you're gonna rebuild. You don't even bother to hide your plans. Dad! Nira jumped up.
How can you say that?
We care about you. Caring looks different, Nira. I shook my head. What you're doing is not caring. It's waiting for an inheritance. How dare you? Nira came close to me, her face contorted with anger. We've been visiting you for years, putting up with your senile quirks, and you accuse us of waiting for you to die. I wasn't talking about dying, I replied.
I'm talking about you acting like this house is already yours,
about your disrespect, about the way you plan my life without asking my opinion. Because you're a stubborn old man who can't see further than his nose, Nira shouted. You don't think about the future, about what's best for all of us. For all of us? I grinned bitterly. Or for you and Reeves? You're insufferable. Nira was furious.
At least Mom could talk to you, but since she died, you've gotten worse.
Selfish, stubborn, impossible. Don't talk about your mother like that. My voice became quiet and dangerous. Beatrice would never approve of the way you treat me. Don't you dare tell me how to talk about my mother. Nira raised her hand and I didn't have time to react when her palm met my cheek.
The sound of a slap rang through the silence of the room.
I froze, feeling a burning sensation on my skin and an even greater burning inside, from humiliation, anger, and pain. My own daughter had slapped me. And then I heard laughter. Reeves was standing by the fireplace with his hand over his mouth, but his shoulders were shaking with laughter.
Reeves!
Nira pulled him back, but there was no real reproach in her voice. I'm sorry. He tried to hold back, but failed miserably. It was just the look on his face.
Like a hurt child. I looked at my daughter and son-in-law, standing in the living room of my house, laughing at me after I'd been hit. Then I shifted my gaze to my grandchildren. Pearl was crying and Ansel had his arm around her shoulders, his face pale and tense.
At that moment, something broke inside me. It was as if the string that had kept me patient and humble all these years had snapped. "Go away," I said quietly but firmly.
What? Nira stopped smiling.
"Get out of my house, all of you, now! Dad, you can't just—" "I can." I pointed to the door. "This is my house, and I want you to leave." "You're overreacting, Ezra," Reese interjected, no longer laughing. "Nira's just upset. You can't kick us out over this." "I can and I will." I kept my voice low, but there was steel in it. "If you don't leave voluntarily, I'll call the police."
"You wouldn't dare," Nira looked at me defiantly.
I took out my cell phone from my pocket and started dialing a number. Okay, Nira grabbed her purse. "We're leaving now, but this conversation is not over." "It is over for me," I replied, "completely and irrevocably." They'd gotten together in record time. Reeves mumbled something about senility and ingratitude, and Nira was silent, but her eyes thundered.
The grandchildren moved as if in a fog, shocked by what had happened.
As they were leaving, Pearl turned around. "Grandfather, Pearl, now," Nira sharply called out to her. The door slammed shut, and I was alone in the silence of the house. I sank slowly into the chair, feeling my knees shake. My right cheek still burned from the slap, but it burned worse inside. The humiliation, the betrayal, the realization that my own daughter didn't just disrespect me, she despised me. I sat in silence until I heard their car pull away. Only then did I allow myself to cover my face with my hands, not to cry. No, the tears weren't coming. Just to sit in the darkness created by my palms and think about how things had gotten to this point. Beatrice had always been a buffer between me and Nira. She smoothed out the sharp edges, knew how to find compromises. Without her, our relationship deteriorated quickly. But never before had it come to physical violence and public humiliation. At that moment, I realized I couldn't take it anymore. Something had to change. And that something is my attitude towards the situation. My passivity, my desire to preserve my family at all costs. I got up and went to the window. It was already dark outside. Somewhere in the distance, the windows of neighboring houses were shining. Other families lived there with their own problems and joys. I looked at those lights and made a decision I should have made long ago. No one else would treat me as a burden, as an obstacle to my inheritance. I don't deserve to be treated that way, and I will do whatever it takes to protect myself and my dignity, even if it means severing the last ties that bind me to my only daughter. I was up all night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the evening in my head. Nira's slap, Reeves' laughter, Pearl's tears. It all mixed into a bitter cocktail of disappointment and humiliation. Toward morning, I got up and brewed myself a strong cup of coffee, the only thing that could bring my thoughts to order. With cup in hand, I walked out to the backyard and sat in an old garden chair. The sky was gradually getting lighter, turning pink. Beatrice loved early mornings like this. "Ezra," she said, "there is nothing more beautiful than the beginning of a new day, so many possibilities, so many decisions to make." Decisions, I sighed and sipped my coffee. I had made many decisions in my 67 years of life. Some were right, some were wrong. But now, I was faced with perhaps the most difficult choice of all. My thoughts traveled back 40 years to when Beatrice and I first bought this house. It was smaller and simpler then, old, dilapidated, with a leaky roof and creaky floorboards. But we had plans and dreams. Every weekend I repaired something, rebuilt something, improved something. Beatrice did the garden and the interior. We had invested in this house, not just money, but a part of ourselves. And then Nira was born, a tiny creature with chubby cheeks and a lock of dark hair. We were so happy for her. Beatrice painted the walls of the nursery herself, clouds, sunshine, rainbows. I built a wooden crib and a swing in the yard. We were so happy, so full of hope. When exactly did it all go wrong? Maybe when Nira, became a teenager and began to feel ashamed of our simple manners and humble lifestyle. Or when she met Reeves, ambitious and superficial, who always looked at us with barely concealed condescension. Or when Beatrice fell ill, and instead of support, Nira only visited her mother occasionally, always in a hurry to leave. I finished my coffee and set the cup on the table. The past can't be changed, but the future was still in my hands. I walked back into the house and headed for the study. On the desk was a folder of documents, wills, insurance policies, bank statements, all neatly categorized. Beatrice had taught me that. Order in the papers is order in the head, she used to say. I opened the will and reread it. A simple document, drafted 5 years ago after Beatrice's death. All my property, including the house, was to go to Nira as sole heiress. It seemed natural at the time, but now I knew I had to change everything. I took out my cell phone and dialed a number. It was answered after the third ring. "Pryor here." Vance's voice sounded as dry and businesslike as ever. "Vance, this is Ezra Holloway." "Ezra!" There was a warm note in his voice. "Haven't heard from you in a while. How have you been?" "I've been better," I said honestly. "I need your professional help. I want to change my will." Pause on the other end of the line. "I understand. When do you want to meet?" "The sooner the better. Is today possible?" "Let me check my calendar." Rustling papers. "I can see you at 2. Is that okay?" "Perfect. Thank you. Vance?" "You're welcome. And, Ezra." He paused. "Is everything okay?" "Should be soon," I replied and ended the call. After breakfast, I showered, shaved, and put on the suit I usually saved for special occasions. I looked at myself in the mirror, a thin man with gray hair and tired eyes. But there was a determination in those eyes now that hadn't been there yesterday. Before I left, I checked my cell phone. 5 missed calls from Nira and a few messages. I didn't bother reading them. Whatever she was saying now, apologies, threats, attempts to justify herself, wasn't going to change my mind. Vance Pryor's office was in downtown Champaign, in an old brick building with wrought iron bars on the windows. Vance had been a friend of mine since my high school days and was the only one of the old firm left who hadn't moved away and died. He specialized in family law and wills, and I trusted him implicitly. "Ezra!" Vance met me at the door of his office. Short, overweight, with balding hair and thin-rimmed glasses. "Come in, sit down. Coffee?" I wouldn't say no. Vance nodded to his assistant, a young woman with curly hair, and she left, quietly closing the door behind her. "So," Vance sat down across from me. "You want to change the will. May I ask what the reason was?" I took a deep breath and told him everything. About the gradual deterioration of my relationship with my daughter and son-in-law, about their obvious impatience to have my house, about last night's dinner, the slap and the humiliation. Vance listened without interrupting, making occasional notes in his notebook. When I finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I'm sorry, Ezra. It's a difficult situation." "I know," I shrugged. "But I can't pretend everything's okay anymore. I don't want my house and everything I've earned to go to people who don't respect me and the things I hold dear." "I understand." Vance put his glasses back on. "What are you planning? Do you have any other heirs in mind?" "Yes, first, I want to provide for my grandchildren. It's not their fault their parents are the way they are. Secondly, there are several charities Beatrice supported, and—" I hesitated. "I'd like to leave some to you, Vance." He raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Me? Ezra, that's very generous, but—" "You're the only one who's remained my friend all these years," I interrupted him. "You supported Beatrice and me during her illness. You deserve that." Vance looked touched, but quickly returned to a professional tone. "Good. Let's go over the details." We spent the next 2 hours working on a new will. I decided to set up a trust fund for my grandchildren, from which they could receive funds for their education and initial capital for life, but only after the age of 21. Some of the money was to go to charity, to cancer funds, and to support low-income families. To Vance, I left a small but significant amount, and the house. I decided to sell the house as soon as I found a suitable place to live. The money from the sale was to go into the same trust fund. I didn't want Nira and Reeves to get anything. "Are you sure about the house?" Vance asked when we were finishing up. "I know how much he means to you. That's why I don't want Reeves to tear down everything Beatrice built and turn it into his fashion project," I replied. "I'd rather let him be bought by a family who will appreciate his soul." Vance nodded. "Your decision. I'll have the paperwork ready by early next week. You'll need to come sign them in the presence of witnesses." "Thank you, Vance." I shook his hand. "I feel so much better knowing it's going to be my way." "That's what wills are for," he smiled, "so that your will can be carried out." As I left Vance's office, I felt strangely relieved, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I decided to walk home, enjoying the warm day and contemplating my next steps. But my peacefulness didn't last long. As I approached the house, I noticed a familiar car in the driveway, Reeves' silver BMW. They were here. I slowed down, feeling the tension returning. I didn't want to make another scene, but then I thought, this is my home. I shouldn't avoid it because of them. I headed determinedly toward the front door, but stopped when I heard voices. They were coming from behind the house, from the back terrace. I walked around the house along the garden path and saw Nira and Reeves sitting at the garden table with some papers. They didn't notice me. "Turn this part into a conservatory," Reeves said, pointing to something on the paper. "Tear down the wall between the kitchen and the dining room. Make an open space." "What about his study?" Nira asked. "You said you wanted to make it your office." "Sure," Reeves nodded. "It's the perfect place. And the veranda needs a complete makeover. It looks like it's from the last century." I stood frozen in place, unable to believe my ears. Not 24 hours after our fight, and they were already planning renovations to my house. My house, for crying out loud. "What about the furniture?" Nira asked, flipping through some magazine. "Most of it will have to be thrown out, especially those old armchairs and bookcases. It's all going to the dump," Reeves said. "Except for the piano, which is an antique and might look good in the living room after restoration. Beatrice's piano. The only item she brought back from her parents' house. The one she taught little Nira to play on. They were going to keep it as some kind of trinket." "How long do you think it will be before he gives up and moves?" Reeves asked, sipping something from his glass. "I don't know," Nira sighed. "After last night, he might be even more stubborn. But we'll find a way to convince him. At his age, it's not safe to live alone in a house this big." "Maybe we should talk to a doctor," Reeves suggested. "If we get a medical opinion that he can't live on his own..." "It's complicated," Nira shook her head. "Dad's in good shape for his age, but it's not a bad idea. I'll have to think about it." They were discussing how to take away my independence, how to take my house, without waiting for me to die. I stepped back quietly, trying not to make any noise. Anger, frustration, pain, all of it was simmering inside, but now was not the time for confrontation. Right now, I needed to act quickly and decisively. I walked around the house and stealthily entered through the front door. I went upstairs to the bedroom, careful not to creak the floorboards. I took a small bag out of the closet and began to put the essentials in it. A change of clothes, toiletries, medications. I added a photo album with my most treasured pictures and a box of Beatrice's jewelry that I kept for my grandchildren. Then I wrote a short note and left it in a prominent place on the kitchen table. "I've heard everything. Don't come looking for me. Communication only through Vance Pryor's attorney." I quietly walked out the side door and headed for the garage. My old Ford stood there, cranked up and running. I pulled into the driveway without looking back at the house. I needed time and space to think things through. I also needed a safe place where Nira and Reeves couldn't get to me. The first thing I did was go to the bank and withdraw a substantial amount of cash. Not my entire savings, of course, but enough to last me a few months. Then I called Vance and briefly explained the situation. "You can stay at my place," he suggested. "Margaret and I have a guest room." "Thanks, friend. But I don't want to involve you in this any more than necessary," I replied. "I have another plan." The plan was simple. There was a small motel on the outskirts of Champaign, inconspicuous but clean. I rented a room there for a week, paying cash, and calling myself Henry Baker. I needed time to find an apartment and organize the sale of the house. In the motel room, I sat on the bed and let myself exhale for the first time all day. I turned my phone off. I didn't want to hear any apologies or threats from Nira. My only regret was that I wouldn't be able to see my grandchildren for a while. But I'd find a way to contact them later when things settled down. I pulled a photo album out of my bag and opened it. From the yellowed pages, the faces of the past stared back at me, a young Beatrice with a bouquet of wildflowers, little Nira on the playground, the three of us on a picnic by the lake. Happy moments that would never come back. "What would you do, Beatrice?" I mentally asked, looking at my wife's picture. She had always been wiser than me about family matters. The answer came almost immediately, as if she were really there for me. Beatrice would never let anyone, not even her own daughter, treat her disrespectfully. She would protect what she holds dear, and she would want our grandchildren to have all the opportunities we could give them. I closed the scrapbook and tucked it back into my bag. The decision had been made, and I wasn't going to back down. Nira and Reeves wouldn't get the house or the money. Everything would go to their grandchildren in charity. And if that meant I had to start my life over at 67, so be it. I lay down on the bed and closed my eyes. For the first time in a long time, I felt not bitterness or disappointment, but a strange satisfaction. I was finally in control of my life, and no one, not Nira, not Reeves, not anyone else, would be able to decide for me anymore. It's been 2 weeks since I left my house. 2 weeks of relative peace in a quiet motel on the outskirts of town. I hardly ever went out, ate at the little cafe across the street, and met only with Vance, who brought me papers and news. And the news was, interesting. Nira had everyone she knew on the street trying to find me. She even went to the police, claiming I was an elderly person in an unstable mental state. But the police quickly realized that I had left voluntarily, leaving a note, and took no action. Reeves, according to Vance, came to his office and demanded information about my whereabouts. Vance, true to his professional ethics, refused to disclose anything, citing attorney-client privilege. Reeves left enraged, threatening legal action. But the important thing was that the new will was ready. I signed it in front of witnesses in Vance's office 3 days ago. Now, it was official. My house and most of my fortune went into a special trust for my grandchildren. They would have access to the funds only after they graduated from college, and only for specific purposes: education, buying their first home, starting a business. Some of the money was earmarked for charity, as planned, and a significant amount went to Hugo Quint, my old friend who had supported Beatrice and me during her illness and had always treated me with genuine respect. Nira and Reeves got nothing. Nothing at all. It was time to announce it to them in person. I could, of course, just wait until I died and let them learn the truth from the official documents, but something inside me demanded a confrontation. I wanted to see their faces when they realized their plans had fallen apart. I called Nira from the new cell phone I'd bought especially for the occasion. "Hello?" Her voice sounded wary. The number was unfamiliar to her. "It's me, Nira." "Daddy?" She instantly turned to screaming. "Where are you? We're going crazy with worry. How could you just disappear?" "I'm fine," I replied dryly. "And I want to meet you and Reeves. We need to talk." "Of course, Daddy," she said, her voice a little ingratiating. We've been so worried. Are you coming home? No, I'll meet you at a neutral location, Bluebird Cafe on Maple Street, tomorrow afternoon at 3. But Dad, wouldn't it be better? Tomorrow at 3 o'clock, Neera. I didn't listen to any objections. And yes, I know you went to the police. Don't do that again. I hung up without waiting for an answer. The next day, I arrived at the cafe half an hour early. I chose a table in the corner, ordered a coffee, and waited. Bluebird was a small, cozy establishment with a minimum number of visitors in the afternoon, the perfect place for the conversation I had planned. At exactly 3, Neera and Reeves appeared in the doorway. They looked around, spotted me, and headed toward my table. Neera looked worried. Reeves looked annoyed. Dad, Neera rushed to hug me, but I remained seated, not responding to the hug. She awkwardly pulled away and sat across from me. We were so worried. Where have you been all this time? Someplace safe, I answered, looking her straight in the eye. Away from the people who planned to take away my home and independence. Neera's face stretched. What are you talking about?
I heard your conversation on the terrace, I said simply. About remodeling the house, about convincing the doctor to declare me incompetent. Neera went pale and Reeves frowned. Ezra, you misunderstood, he began. We were just discussing options. There's no need to lie, Reeves. I held up my hand, stopping him. I've heard enough to know your true intentions, and that's why I invited you here today. I pulled an envelope from my inside jacket pocket and placed it on the table. What is it? Neera asked without touching the envelope. A copy of my new will, I answered. I've completely revised the distribution of the inheritance. Reeves tensed, his gaze sharp, assessing. What does that mean? He asked, trying to remain calm. It means that neither of you will get the house or the money, I said quietly but firmly. Everything will go into a trust for Pearl and Ansel. They'll only be able to use the funds after they graduate from college and only for education, housing, or business. No sports cars or fancy resorts. Neera and Reeves exchanged shocked looks. But Dad! Neera tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. You can't do this. We are your family. Family doesn't humiliate each other, I reply. A family doesn't plan how to get rid of a burden in the form of an elderly father. Family doesn't slap each other and laugh about it. That was one time, Neera exclaimed. I was furious. I had no control over myself. I've already apologized. No, you haven't, I said calmly. Not once in the last 2 weeks have you said sorry. You just accused me of bothering you by disappearing. Reeves was starting to lose his patience. Look, Ezra, no drama. You're upset. We understand. But disinheriting us because of one fight is too much. This isn't about one fight. I shook my head. It's about years of neglect, disrespect, and selfishness. You both stopped seeing me as a human being a long time ago. To you, I'm just an obstacle to my house and money. That's not true. Neera raised her voice, attracting the attention of the few people in the cafe. We care about you. You take care of my property, I corrected. And now that you know you won't get it, I'm sure your concern will instantly evaporate. Reeves began to read the document, his face gradually turning red. You left the money to Hugo Quint? He looked up at me in disbelief. That loser who lives on the dole? Hugo lost his job because his company was shut down, I countered. And he never asked me for money, unlike you. He was there for me when Beatrice was dying. He helped me when I was having a hard time. He deserves that money more than you do. This is ridiculous. Reeves threw the papers on the table. You can't give everything to your grandchildren. They're minors. That's why everything will be in a trust, I shrugged. They'll have access to the funds when they're ready to use them wisely. What about us? Neera looked at me in disbelief. Your own daughter? You're leaving us with nothing? I'm leaving you with exactly what you deserve, I replied. You both earn enough. You have your own home.
You're not in need. The house is mortgaged, Reeves blurted out, and the business is barely afloat. We were counting on— He stopped abruptly, but it was too late. The words had already come out. Exactly, I nodded. You were counting on my money, not on me, on my money. Neera looked confused, her eyes filled with tears. Dad, please think again. We can fix this. Come back home. We'll take care of you. I've already found an apartment, I said. It's small, but it's comfortable, and I'm planning to sell the house. Sell? Reeves jumped on the spot. You can't. I can and I will. I was adamant. The house is too big for me alone, as you keep telling me. The money from the sale will go into the same trust fund. But it's Mom's house. Neera looked genuinely shocked. You can't sell it. There are so many memories there. The memories will stay with me. I tapped my finger on my temple. And the house is just a building. A building that you plan to completely rebuild by throwing out all the furniture and tearing down the walls. So you don't need to tell me about sentimental value. Reeves suddenly changed tactics. Okay, you're right. He put his hands out in a conciliatory gesture. We were not very tactful, but we can fix this. Let's just sit down and discuss this intelligently. I have nothing to talk to you about. I closed the folder. The decision has been made. The documents are signed and certified. Everything is legally flawless. You can check with your lawyer. He'll confirm that it's almost impossible to contest this will. But you have to leave something to your daughter! Reeves got mad. There are some laws. There's no mandatory inheritance for children in Illinois, I replied calmly. I can dispose of my property as I see fit, and I've decided you won't get anything. Reeves jumped up, his face contorted with rage. You're going to regret this, old man. We'll contest the will. We'll prove that you were incapacitated. Sit down, I said coldly. You're attracting attention. He looked around and reluctantly lowered himself into the chair. You can try to contest the will, I continued, but Vance made sure everything was in order. I've been medically cleared, fully competent. The will was drawn up and signed in the presence of independent witnesses, and of course, your behavior, including threats and attempts at manipulation, is thoroughly documented. Neera looked at me with a lost look. Dad, do you really think we're only with you for the money? I mean, we're your family. I think your husband's slap and laughter speak for themselves, I replied. As do your plans to remodel my house while I'm still alive. Like trying to convince a doctor to declare me incompetent. We've never— Neera began, but I interrupted her. Don't lie to me again, Neera. I heard your conversation on the terrace, word for word. Reeves snorted dismissively. So what now? You're just going to disappear from our lives? Deprive the grandkids of their grandfather? No, I shook my head. I'll keep in touch with Pearl and Ansel directly. They're old enough to have their own phones and make their own decisions. We'll forbid them from communicating with you, Reeves hissed. Then you'll not only deprive them of their grandfather, but also of their inheritance, I shrugged, because one of the conditions of the trust fund is that they communicate with me regularly until I die. If you prevent it, all the money will go to charity. Neera gripped the table so hard her knuckles turned white. You can't do this to us. We're your family. I don't consider you my family anymore, I said firmly. Family is respect, care, and love. I haven't gotten any of that from you in years. I got up from the table. This is the end of our conversation. If you have any legal questions, please contact Vance Pryor. He represents my interests. Wait, Neera jumped up. You can't just walk away. Yes, I can. I buttoned my jacket, and I'm leaving. Goodbye. I headed for the exit, feeling their stares on my back, but I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see their faces, not Reeves's angry face, not Neera's confused face. I'd done what I had to do. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I'd done the right thing. The sun was shining brightly outside. I took a deep breath of fresh air and headed to my car. There was a strange lightness inside, as if a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I knew this wasn't over. Nira and Reeves wouldn't put up with it that easily. But now I had a plan and the determination to stick to it. I got into my car and started the engine. My phone rang, Nira's of course. I muted it and put the phone in the glove compartment. Everything that needed to be said had already been said. Now, a new chapter of my life was beginning, without the toxic relationship, without the constant humiliation, without feeling like I was a burden to my own daughter. I pulled into the driveway thinking about what I would say to my grandchildren. They deserved an explanation, and I planned to give it, honestly, but sparingly. They didn't have to feel guilty or obligated to choose between me and their parents. Behind me, Nira and Reeves popped out of the cafe. I could see them in my rearview mirror. They were standing on the sidewalk, Nira yelling something, Reeves holding her hand, keeping her from running after me. Their figures grew smaller and smaller until they were completely out of sight. I was driving forward, toward my new apartment, toward my new life, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like an old, lonely man, but someone who had finally taken his fate into his own hands. As I drove past the park, I noticed the bench where Beatrice and I often sat on nice days. I stopped the car, got out, and sat on that bench. Now, after everything that had happened, I felt her absence especially keenly. "Did I make the right choice, Beatrice?" I asked mentally, looking up at the old oak tree under which we liked to picnic. The wind swayed the tree's branches slightly, and for a moment I thought I heard her voice, quiet and confident. "Yes, Ezra, you did what you had to do." I sat on the bench for a while longer, watching children playing and couples walking. Life went on. And my life went on too. Different, new, but my own. When I finally got back to the car, my phone had 20 missed calls from Nira, 10 from Reeves, and 1 message from Pearl. "Grandpa, what's going on? Mom and Dad are furious. Please call me." I smiled. "Yes, I'll contact my grandchildren for sure. I'll explain everything to them." And Nira and Reeves? Well, they got exactly what they deserved. My new apartment was on the 3rd floor of a low brick building on the east side of Champaign. 2 small windows looked out onto a quiet courtyard with a few old maple trees, a bedroom, a living room combined with a kitchen, and a compact bathroom. Everything a single man needed. No extra rooms to heat and clean, no creaky stairs or leaky roofs. Simplicity and functionality. I moved only the essentials from my old house here. Clothes, books, some photos, and small Beatrice-related mementos. The rest either went into storage until better times or was sold with the house. Yes, I sold the house. Quickly, without sentimentality, at market value. A young family with 2 small children were delighted with the spacious rooms and large garden. They had no plans to tear down walls or throw out old furniture. They liked the house as it was. That was comforting. I knew Beatrice would approve of these new owners. Of course, Nira and Reeves tried to prevent the sale. They even hired a lawyer who sent me a threatening letter, demanding I stop the deal. But Vance quickly took care of it. The house was my property, and I had every right to dispose of it as I saw fit. No legal tricks could change that. They also tried to contest the new will, claiming I was incapacitated and under the influence, but medical reports and testimony refuted these charges. After months of fruitless attempts, their attorney conceded defeat. The will was upheld. Nira called me every day for the first 2 weeks after we met at the cafe. I didn't answer. Then the calls became less frequent and the messages angrier. She went from pleading and apologizing to accusations and threats. "You're going to regret this, Dad. You betrayed your family. Mom would never approve of your behavior." I read these messages with sadness but no desire to respond. Too many bridges had been burned. Too many resentments accumulated. Reeves also tried to contact me, but his messages didn't even attempt to apologize. Only business proposals. "Let's discuss a compromise. I have a favorable investment offer. Maybe we could negotiate a partial sale of the house." He was only interested in money, never in relationships. Things were more complicated with the grandchildren.
Pearl and Ansel were confused and saddened by what had happened.
I met with them a week after my conversation with Nira and Reeves at the same Bluebird Cafe as they were returning from school. "Grandpa, what's going on?" Pearl asked as they sat down at my table. "Mom and Dad say that you've gone crazy and kicked them out of your life." "I'm not crazy, honey," I said softly.
"I just made a decision that I think is right."
"But why did you sell the house?" Ansel looked shocked. "It's Grandma's house, our house." I explained everything to them, not going into the unpleasant details about the slapping and laughing, but telling them about the disrespect, the plans to modernize the house, the attempts to control my life and finances. They listened attentively, occasionally glancing over but not interrupting.
"We knew something was wrong," Ansel finally said.
"Mom and Dad always talked about your house as theirs. It was weird. But they're our parents." Pearl looked confused. "We can't just—" "I'm not asking you to choose between me and your parents," I interrupted her. "I never will. They're your family and you have to respect them. But you have to respect yourself too." "What do you mean?" Ansel asked.
"I mean that you should follow your dreams and goals," I answered.
"Pearl, if you want to study drama, do it. Ansel, if you are interested in physics, do it. Don't let anyone, not even your parents, decide for you what you want to be." Pearl suddenly burst into tears. "My mom says actresses are waitresses who sometimes get lucky."
"Your mom's afraid you'll run into difficulties,"
I said softly. "That's understandable. But it's your life, and only you can decide which difficulties are worth your time and energy." I told them about the trust fund I had set up for them, about how they would have access to the funds after college, and could use them for education, housing, or business. "But that's a lot of money." Ansel looked stunned.
"Money is a tool, nothing more," I replied.
"It can help you realize your dreams, but it won't make you happy on its own. Use it wisely." We agreed to meet once a week in different places so as not to arouse the suspicions of Nira and Reeves. They were against us meeting, of course, but teenagers can keep secrets, especially when it comes to something important to them.
And then my travels began.
The first was the Grand Canyon, a place Beatrice and I had always wanted to visit but had always put off for later. I stood on the edge of this giant crevice in the earth, feeling the wind ruffling my gray hair, and thought about how often we put life on hold, waiting for the right time that may never come.
Afterward, there was New Orleans with its jazz and Creole cuisine,
San Francisco with its rolling hills and fog, New York with its skyscrapers and museums. I took my time, spending a week or two in each city, soaking up the atmosphere, talking to the locals, trying new foods. At 67, I was finally living the life I had always wanted. Between trips, I would return to my small apartment in Champaign and see my grandchildren.
They were blossoming in front of my eyes.
Pearl got the lead in the school play. Ansel won the science Olympiad. They shared with me their successes and failures, their dreams and fears. I listened without judging or imposing my opinion, just supporting them in their choices. Nira and Reeves, of course, found out about our meetings. It's hard to keep such secrets in a small town.
Their reaction was predictable.
First anger and inhibitions, then attempts to control and direct our communication. But when they realized it wasn't working, that the twins were still finding ways to meet with me, they relented, or pretended to. "Mom's been asking about you," Pearl said during one of our meetings about 6 months after the breakup. "She wants to know if you've changed your mind about the will."
I shook my head.
"So she's only interested in the money?"
Pearl lowered her eyes.
"Not only, I guess. But she and Daddy, they're having money problems. Dad's business isn't doing so well."
"I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely.
"But my decision stands."
"I understand." Pearl nodded. "I just thought I should ask." I didn't blame her for it. She loved her parents, despite their flaws, and it was the right thing to do.
Months went by. I continued to travel, not just in America anymore, but outside of America. Paris, Rome, Barcelona, Tokyo. Places Beatrice and I had dreamed of while looking at glossy magazines in the evenings. I saw the sunset over the Eiffel Tower, ate real pasta in a small trattoria in Rome, listened to flamenco in a basement bar in Barcelona, admired the cherry blossoms in Japan. And each time, standing in front of yet another wonder of the world or art, I mentally spoke to Beatrice. "Look, darling, we're finally here. I wish you could see it with your own eyes." Sometimes I thought I could feel her presence close by, a light touch on my shoulder, the faint scent of her perfume, a quiet laugh in the sound of the waves. The grandchildren were graduating from high school. Pearl received a scholarship to the prestigious School of Dramatic Arts in New York. Ansel went to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology to study physics. I was proud of them both and made no secret of it. "I wouldn't have made up my mind without you," Pearl told me as we celebrated her acceptance at a small restaurant. "Mom was against acting until the last minute." "You made that decision on your own," I said.
I was just being supportive. And that means more than you realize. She squeezed my hand. I haven't met Neera and Reeves directly all this time. They had tried to arrange chance meetings a few times, trailing me outside my apartment or places where I used to meet my grandchildren. But I always found a way to avoid the conversation, not out of petty revenge. I just knew we had nothing more to say to each other. Neera came to my apartment unannounced twice. The first time was 3 months after our breakup, when she was still trying to reason with me and get things back to normal. I didn't open the door, listening to her yelling and banging. The second time was almost a year later, when their financial problems apparently became quite serious. She stood in the rain, drenched and miserable, begging me for help. It was hard to see my daughter in that state and not give in. But I knew that if I opened the door, it would start all over again. The manipulation, the demands, the disrespect. Instead, I called Vance and asked him to put me in touch with a good financial counselor who could help Neera and Reeves get out of debt. I paid this counselor anonymously, not because I forgave them, but because, no matter what, I didn't want my daughter to end up on the streets. As time went on, the pain gradually dulled. I no longer woke up at night from the bitterness of betrayal. I didn't flinch when I heard Neera's name. I didn't cringe when I remembered the slap and Reeves' laughter. It all faded into the background, became a story from a past life. There was room in my new life for a lot of things: travel and new experiences, grandchildren and their successes, old friends like Vance and Hugo, with whom I now spent more time. But there was no room for toxic relationships and insincere reconciliation. 2 years after our breakup, Neera tried to contact me again, this time through a letter. A long, emotional message full of apologies and admissions of wrongdoing. "Dad, I was a terrible daughter. I only thought about myself and money. I didn't appreciate you as a person. Please give me a chance to make things right." I read that letter several times, trying to feel something. The joy of recognition, the desire to repair the relationship, the hope of a new beginning. But I felt nothing but exhaustion. It was too late. Too much water had passed. The wound of betrayal was too deep. I wrote a short reply. "Neera, I'm glad you've realized your mistakes. I hope this helps you build a better relationship with your children than you and I had. I don't hold a grudge against you, but I don't see any possibility of a renewed relationship. Some bridges can't be rebuilt, and that's okay. I wish you all the best. Ezra." I don't know how she felt when she received that letter. We didn't communicate directly anymore. I knew about her life only what her grandchildren told me, that she and Reeves had sold their house and moved to a smaller apartment, that Reeves had found a full-time job with a large landscaping company after giving up the idea of his own business, that Neera still worked at a travel agency but now spent more time focusing on her health and hobbies. Maybe my leaving their lives and the loss of their expected inheritance was a kind of impetus for them to reevaluate their values. Maybe they finally learned to live within their means and appreciate what they have. I hoped they had.
not out of revenge, but because I sincerely wished them a better life, just without me in it. My own life had run its course. At 70, I felt more alive and free than ever. I traveled, read, met with friends, and enjoyed the successes of my grandchildren. My small apartment became a real home, cozy, warm, filled with books and souvenirs from different countries. Sometimes I miss the old house, the creak of the floorboards, the rustling of the leaves of the big oak tree outside my bedroom window, the smell of the jasmine that Beatrice had planted by the porch. But I didn't regret my decision to sell it. A house is just walls. A real home is a place where you feel safe and at peace, and I had finally found that place, within myself. One spring day, returning from another trip, this time from Greece, where I had spent 2 weeks exploring ancient ruins and enjoying the local cuisine, I was sitting on the balcony of my apartment, sorting through photos. The sun was slipping toward sunset, coloring the sky in shades of pink and gold. From the street came the laughter of children playing in the park across the street. I thought about my life, a long life, with ups and downs, joys and sorrows, about the woman I had loved with all my heart and lost too soon, about the daughter who chose material values over family ties, about grandchildren who, despite everything, grew up to be decent people, about friends who have supported me through difficult times, about the places I visited and the experiences I gained. And I realized that despite the pain of separation from my daughter, despite the loneliness that sometimes rolled in on quiet evenings, I was happy. Not happy all the time. There's no such thing. But deeply, fundamentally happy with my life and the decisions I had made. I didn't regret changing my will and severing my relationship with Naira and Reeves. It was a hard but necessary decision. Sometimes you have to let go of one relationship in order to preserve yourself and build another, a healthier and more honest one. I knew some people wouldn't understand my choice. For many, family is sacred. Relationships with children need to be maintained at all costs. But I've learned through experience that some relationships are toxic in nature, and no amount of effort will make them healthy. Sometimes the best solution is to recognize that and move on. The sun had finally disappeared over the horizon, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the sky. I put the photos back in the envelope and went back to the apartment. Tomorrow I planned to meet my grandchildren, who came home for vacation. The day after tomorrow, lunch with Vance and Hugo. And in a month, to go on another trip, perhaps to India or Morocco. My life went on, without regrets, without bitterness, with acceptance of the past and hope for the future. And that, I think, is where real wisdom lies, not in avoiding difficult decisions, but in making them and moving on, living a full and fulfilling life, no matter what.